Okay, I
Is
think
the
it is
screen
right time
visible
to.
and am I audible? Everything fine?
Yeah, you are absolutely visible. Okay,
Okay.
so I will just give a 1 minute intro. To start with, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening. To begin with, we will be talking about a very commonly used test, something called as liver function test for your daily clinical purposes. Now, as a surgeon, liver function test will be important provided because in patients not only with obstructive jaundice but patients with other parameters and other abdominal conditions, assessment of nutritional parameters, assessment of drug toxicities, you require liver function test in your armamentarium daily. So this brief description that Dr. Shoptik Basu and I will be adding a few points at the end of his talk will be to summarize each and every component of the liver function test that we discuss. So definitely, as I have said, that Dr. Shoptik Basu will be dealing with the majority, each and every individual analysis. And then at the end of that discussion, we'll be having a few exam-oriented questions, some old archive questions, some new ones about what is something called as liver function test. So Shoptik, the screen is yours now. Please.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. And we'll talk about liver function tests. Most of these things generally come as a short note in your theory exams, but nevertheless, if you have a case on obstructive jaundice, you might be asked about liver function tests. Now, there is a practical approach to these liver function tests. As said, along with this, most of it has a bit of a biochemistry domain, which might be a bit boring, but I'll try to do justice by giving you a bit of clinical aspects into this topic that has been allotted today. So, when you request for a liver function test, say in your hospital or any lab, for instance, you get a report like this, isn't it? You get a report with the name of the patient, the date, you'll get the referring doctor, and you get all of these parameters which will be written on the piece of paper, and you'll have a normal value that is given over here. So whenever you're analyzing this, always check the given value with the normal value, because some of these are analyzed by auto analyzers, and due to the changes of reagent and their concentrations, you will need to refer to these values. Often I'll give you a set of normal values in all of these, but it's always a good practice to check the normal value and proceed to your analysis of the liver function test, right? So liver function tests can be classified based on the four aspects. Okay, so you can have tests which analyze the injury status of a hepatocyte. Okay, so which means that prolonged cause of any pathology that causes an injury to the hepatocyte will cause a marked rise in a few parameters in the LFT. Okay, that is your ALT and AST. Okay, you can have cholestasis, which means suppose there is a obstruction to the drainage of bile. It can be an intrahepatic obstruction or an extrahepatic obstruction. Okay, now that will cause a rise in a few other parameters like your alkaline phosphatase and your GGT, right? Now, a few tests also help you analyze the synthetic capacity of the liver, okay, which means how well the hepatocyte is functioning. Now, this will be given by albumin and PT-INR. Okay. Now, I'll deal with each of these in details, and each hepatocyte has a metabolic capacity. Like we know, the liver is one organ that is responsible for detoxification of various foreign elements, including metabolism of drugs. Now, if your hepatocyte function is not correct, or it's getting deranged, few parameters like you will have a raised bilirubin. Now there are a few surrogate ways of evaluating this by a few dye tests which are used commonly, I mean not by us generally as surgeons, general surgeons, but yes, GI surgeons or gastroenterologists or cancer surgeons do use these tests. at times to assess the metabolic capacity of the liver, right? So broadly classifying, you have a test for hepatocyte injury, you have a test for cholestasis, you have a test for assessing the synthetic capacity, and you have a test for assessing the metabolic capacity, right? So we'll deal with each of these one by one. Now, uh, the first thing is a test for assessing the hepatocyte injury, right? Now, see, each of this hepatocyte are arranged in a this configuration where you have a central vein in the middle and you have a portal triad in the periphery, right? Now, blood will flow because 75% of blood flow comes from the liver. Now, blood will flow from the um, portal vein to the central vein and go to the hepatic vein, right? Now, each of this, uh, you know, architectural inside the architectural basic architectural histology of the liver. Now there are cells, okay, the hepatocytes, which synthesis a few enzymes. It has mitochondria, it has Golgi apparatus, and all of these things. Now they will synthesize a few enzymes. Now suppose this hepatocyte is dead, okay, by necrosis or apoptosis or anything. Whatever it has synthesized will come out into the blood, right? Okay, and that is when you get a few enzymes that are available in your um, test, I mean, or your serum that you analyze from the blood. Okay, so you take LFTs in a plain vial, okay, the red one. Okay, so you take your LFTs and so you get a report. So you see that your aminotransferase enzymes are raised. Okay, now it can be two things. You can have an SGOT or an SGPT. Okay, now what is SGOT? This is often asked as an MCQ. Serum glutamic oxaloacetate transaminase. Okay, it is also known as AST, which is aspartate aminotransferase. Okay, now the other enzyme that is there is called SGPT. Okay, that is serum glutamic pyruvate transaminase. Okay, it is also known as ALT or alanine transaminase or alanine aminotransferase. Okay, now the normal value of these is something around 30 to 40 international units per liter. And see, you will have raised aminases. Okay, you will have these enzymes raised. Now, when is this raised? Okay, you have clinical conditions when suppose you get a very high, like 10 to 20%, 10 to 20 times the normal value. That is, say 10 to 20 times of this 30 to 40. Okay, it can happen in viral hepatitis, it can happen in drug induced liver disease, it can happen in ischemic hepatitis. Okay, now moderate means something around say 5 to 10%. Okay, it happens in all of these things. All of these things which can cause very high, they always go through this phase and they go up like this. Again, you can also have it in alcoholic hepatitis or autoimmune hepatitis. Autoimmune hepatitis, uh, and you have these metabolic liver diseases like your hemochromatosis, Wilson's disease, all of these things. Okay, and also in biliary obstructions. Okay, suppose you have a CBD stone, so there you will have a moderate rise in the liver function tests like your ALT and AST. Okay, because there is some sort of hepatocyte injury, right? Mild increase will be a 1.5 to 5 times, where it can happen with chronic viral hepatitis, non-alcoholic fatty liver diseases, metabolic liver diseases, again granulomatous hepatitis, and congestive cardiac failure. Now congestive cardiac failure, what happens is that there is a back pressure, and then there is a bit of stagnation of the blood in the IVC and all of these things, and there is a back pressure, and it causes the injury to the hepatocytes. Okay, now you might say that in a patient with a very high ALT or AST, you say the liver cells are damaged. Yes, it is true, but the amount of liver cells damaged, okay, will give you a declining level. Okay, the more your cells are damaged, you will say the values will increase. No, we will have a declining levels because the liver cells will not be able to synthesize these ALT and AST enzymes. So because of which there'll be a declining pattern. Okay, so declining pattern is seen in fulminant hepatic failure. Okay, right. So I'll just go through this again. You have a hepatocyte where blood goes from the portal vein to the central vein. Now, if you have hepatocyte injury due to any drug, viral hepatitis or anything, the serum ALT or AST will rise. Okay. Now they can rise very high, moderate, or mild. Okay. The causes have been summarized as such. Okay. Now, a declining pattern of these will be seen in fulminant hepatic failure. Okay. Now I'll give you a clinical scenario. Okay. A 47-year-old male. Yes. Hello.
Sir, in case of hepatic injury, if the liver hepatocyte is not being able to synthesize the enzymes, then why will it get raised in first case?
That is what I'm saying. That this will not correlate with your extent of liver injury, isn't it? So very high patterns you will get, but the thing is that you will get a declining pattern. The question will be asked. See, you get a clinical situation where you get a declining pattern. So in this, there is fulminant hepatic failure. Okay, in fulminant hepatic failure, you'll get a declining pattern. Okay, because your cells are injured, isn't it? So the amount, so there is a loss of large amount of hepatic function, which means whatever is synthesized is coming to the serum. You get a raised pattern, but the thing is gradually start to go down, isn't it? There aren't any hepatocytes left which will synthesize these enzymes. Get it?
Okay, sir.
Okay. So the thing is, you have a 47-year-old male who's been prepared for a lap cholecystectomy, and you get a history of high-risk sexual behavior. Okay, the LFT shows a raised transaminase, and how will you work up this situation? Right now, why do you want to evaluate? Because often you get these patients you're preparing in the outdoor for surgery, and suddenly you see these deranged liver function patterns. Now you need to consult your gastro people because they'll be referred most of these times, and it's quite a common thing that you do now, because you don't want to operate on patients with deranged hepatic function, because that will just add up to the morbidity, right? So that is why how we are going to tackle this is that you check your ALT and AST, you repeat it. Okay, you repeat it maybe once or maybe more than once. There can be an error of sampling, there can be an error from the analysis by the autoanalyzer. Now you also take a history, a drug history, and these high risk behaviors. Okay, now in the blood you do your viral markers like your hepatitis A, B, C, all of these things. So a raised titer of these will cause probably derangement of your liver functions. You can have raised anti-nuclear antibodies like autoimmune hepatitis. You'll have these LKB1, LKB2, LKB3, all of these things. You can have deranged lipid profiles. Also, sugar can be deranged. Okay. Now you've seen that the patient probably has some history or some possible etiology which you have come across with your blood analysis. Okay. Now you need to confirm this with an imaging, and there you can use an ultrasound of the liver and see whether there is any pathology, right? So you can have somebody with a fatty liver, you can have cirrhosis, you'll have macronodular or micronodular cirrhosis, you can have biliary obstruction or portal hypertension, as in your portal splenoportal axis will be dilated. You can have portal cavernomas, and all of these things can come up on your this thing ultrasound or your CT scans, right? Okay. Now, often post-operatively, you will have a patient with raised ALT or AST in your reports. You might be wondering what has happened. So always check whether you're giving the patient some sort of hepatotoxic drugs, whether the patient is in sepsis, which is causing hepatic failure. You can have damage to the hepatobiliary cells. It can be due to ischemic hepatitis. Also, if you've given the patient a pack of blood, and you never know, often with these patients, you're giving blood sometimes with trauma patients, you're giving a lot of blood, you land up with transfusion induced viral hepatitis. We had a patient, we had a necrotizing fasciitis. The patient bled out, and we gave the patient some blood, and later on it comes out that the patient lands up with a bit of very faint jaundice, and the patient lands up with hepatitis B. Okay, so you always have to check whether the patient has received any blood units, and the patient lands up with viral hepatitis. Okay, right. Now coming to cholestatic picture. Okay, tests for cholestasis, they will be your alkaline phosphatase and GGT. Okay, now alkaline phosphatase is synthesized by a large number of cells in the body. Okay, it can come from the liver, it can come from the bone, it can come from the placenta, and it can come from the intestine. Okay, now often there are various isoforms. The thing is called isoenzyme. Okay, the term you might have read in biochemistry, there are isoenzymes. Okay, now I'll come with this later. Now the thing is, the normal value can be measured in 2 units, that is King angstrom. It will be a level from 3 to 13, or your international units per liter, that is 21 to 85. Now this is the common one that you'll be using. The international units is the commonly given unit that we use here in India. Okay, now what happens is that again you have your hepatocytes, your portal triad, and all of these things. Now what happens is that suppose you have a patient with, say, viral hepatitis. These hepatocytes, these hepatocytes were there. Wrong, my pen. Okay, so what happens is that these hepatocytes swell up. Okay, these hepatocytes lose their normal architecture, hexagonal architecture, and they swell up. Now when they swell up, there is the bile duct over here. Here you can see that in the portal triad. What happens? They get blocked. Or suppose you have a gallstone, or maybe a CVD stone, or maybe a cancer in the extrahepatic biliary system. This again gets blocked and causes back pressure in the bile ducts. Okay, now like this intrahepatic or extrahepatic cholestasis, what happens is that the bile acids start to increase. Okay, because there is blockage, there'll be the cells are producing bilirubin. All of these bile acids are getting accumulated in the bile duct. What happens is that there can be a disruption of the hepatic organelles. Okay, the Golgi apparatus and all of these things, and also de novo synthesis of ALP, which again is coming into the blood. Okay, from here, all of these stagnated bile salts and bile acids. Okay, bile salts and bile acids. This will again go in from here. Okay, into the blood, and you get your serum test, which tells you that there is a raised alkaline phosphatase. Okay, now raised alkaline phosphatase can be, a lot of it can go up. Okay, like raised a lot, mostly in malignant situations with extrahepatic biliary obstruction. It can have a mild course in viral hepatitis. Okay, drug-induced liver disease, primary biliary cirrhosis, also in hepatic outflow obstruction like a Budd-Chiari syndrome. Now, Wilson's disease will have a decreased alkaline phosphatase. Okay, right. Now, suppose you have a report where you have an isolated rise in the alkaline phosphatase. Now you have to find out the source. See, I told you that there are various sources of alkaline phosphatase. You can have the liver, you can have the bone, you can have the placenta, you can have the intestine. Okay. Now, suppose in a pregnant mother, you see that there is a rise in the alkaline phosphatase in the 3rd trimester. You can conclude that that is probably due to cholestasis of pregnancy. But again, there is a possibility of having a mixed result due to, a patient with metastatic cancer to the bone, or patient with some sort of parathyroid adenoma. Okay, having bone resorption. Okay, will have raised alkaline phosphatase. Okay. Now, you can also have alkaline phosphatase due to hepatic failure. How will you differentiate between them? Which means these are isoenzymes. Okay. So you do what is called a heat labile test, or you do what is called this gel electrophoresis. Okay. These are tests which are commercially available, which will tell you whether these isoenzymes come from the liver or they come from the bone. So these are like one-liner questions they're asked in your MCQ exams. Is that how will you differentiate between the isoenzyme for, I mean, bone-specific alkaline phosphatase or liver-specific alkaline phosphatase? Yes, the liver-specific alkaline phosphatase is heat labile, and you can also do gel electrophoresis with polyacromide. Okay. Now again, there is another test which is very specific, which will tell you why this is raised. Okay. So that is called gamma glutyl transferase, or GGT. The normal level is 0 to 30. Okay. Now it will tell you whether it is a cause of raise in the alkaline phosphatase, whether it is due to a liver related cause or whether it's something else. Okay. So suppose you have a patient who has alcohol, or suppose you have a patient who consumes hepatotoxic drugs. So these hepatocytes, normal hepatocytes, will get induced because microsomal cytochrome enzyme, CYP enzymes, get damaged by alcohol or drugs, and you have hepatic failure because these cells are getting destroyed. Now that is when you have cholestatic picture. Okay. So then what happens? These GGT will start to rise. See, GGT is very specific for one thing: you're having alcohol or not. Okay. So you have a patient with raised alkaline phosphatase. How will you take this patient up? What is the algorithm? You have to find out whether this is from the bone or from the liver. So do your GGT. Okay, do your GGT. If it's normal, which means the patient can have cholestasis of pregnancy or an intrahepatic cholestasis. Okay, due to some other benign cause. Now, if the patient has a raised GGT, now do a ultrasound of the whole abdomen. Okay. Raise your GGT, you do an ultrasound of the whole abdomen, you see there is a biliary obstruction. Now, obviously, it will tell you that whether there is cholestasis or not. So then you do your MRCP and find out whether it's a CVD stone or is a malignancy. Okay. Now, if there is no biliary obstruction, there is something probably in the intrahepatic cholestatic component. Okay. Which you need to find out via liver biopsy, which is a medicine thing. Okay. The gastro people will do it, or it can be picked up on your imaging. Right. So see, I told you this, that hepatocytes can get damaged in a condition with intrahepatic cholestasis or extrahepatic cholestasis. Okay. So alkaline phosphatase goes up. You're trying to evaluate why it happens. Do a GGT, check it's normal, then it's a different thing. So it's probably maybe this. Okay. If it's not, then your imaging tells you whether it is intrahepatic cholestasis or it's extrahepatic cholestasis. Right. Now, the thing is, if you are ever asked in MCQ that if there's one test which has a negative predictive value for gallstones, it is GGT. Okay. Now, this is an MCQ point. Maximum negative predictive value for gallstones is GGT. Right. Now, there are tests which assess the synthetic capability of the liver. That is albumin, and the other one is prothrombin time. Okay. Now, albumin is synthesized by the hepatocytes, and the half-life is around 3 weeks. Okay. Now, the normal level is 3.5 to 4.5. Now, you have a patient with, say, any cancer you want to operate. The basic target albumin that you try to keep is something around 3.5, isn't it? Because albumin gives you a marker of nutrition of the patient, right? So there you need to keep your albumin at least to 3.5, so that you'll be worried whether the patient will have anastomotic leaks or not. Clinically, the patient can present with edema due to hyperproteinemia. And remember the Starling's forces, which I had discussed in your this general examination class. So albumin is responsible for generating the oncotic pressure inside the blood vessel, right? Now, albumin can be low in a patient with chronic liver disease, okay, with a hepatocellular pathology. Now, you can have somebody with an absence of a hepatic failure, okay, their albumin can also go low. Things like an intestinal cause like tuberculosis or maybe inflammatory bowel disease, nephrotic syndrome, the podocytes of the kidney will get separated, so protein will start to leak out. Okay, then diabetic nephropathy also, the kidney basement membrane charges will get changed, and again you'll have leakage of proteins from there. Now, if the patient has things like kwashiorkor or marasmus, things like protein energy malnutrition, then, or suppose a patient has sepsis, what happens? The patient, if you remember something called a Cuthbertson's hypothesis, let me not get into all of those complicated things. What happens in sepsis? The patient changes from an anabolic stage to catabolic stage. Okay, what is catabolism? Catabolism means that the body is breaking up. Okay, catabolism means body is breaking up. Anabolism means body is building. Okay, so if a patient has fulminant sepsis, what happens? There is a loss of these hepatocytes, there is catabolism, and albumin gets lost. Okay, you can have normal albumin in patients with acute liver disease often, but gradually as the patient's hepatic status or hepatic state, the patient lands up with fulminant hepatic failure, gradually the albumin will start to decrease again because the patient goes into catabolism, right? Now, there is another thing called prothrombin time. Okay, prothrombin time, liver synthesizes clotting factors. Okay, 2, 7, 9, 10. Again, there is something like these clotting factors are synthesized due to a vitamin that is called vitamin K. This acts as a, this acts as an enzyme or rather cofactor to help you generate your clotting factors. Okay, right. So what happens during, hemostasis? That is, you get a stable clot. What happens is that your clotting factors, say 1, 2, 5, 7, 10, all of these clotting factors, what they try to do is form a stable clot, right? They change from prothrombin to thrombin. Now, the time in which this clot is formed is your prothrombin time. Okay. Now, if this somehow gets increased, which means that your liver is unable to synthesize these clotting factors, and there is a risk of bleeding because of that. Okay, because your liver cell is not functioning properly, these clotting factors are not getting synthesized, and there is a risk of bleeding, right? So suppose you have a clinical situation where you want to do, say, a biopsy from the liver. Okay, now you have a raised PTINR. Suppose you want to drain an amoebic liver abscess, the patient is not doing clinically well. The PTINR is very raised. Very common situation we face in our emergency OTs. Our residents see this huge hepatic abscesses. So, Dada, we want to drain it. Okay, fine. Anesthesiologists is saying that patient is not well. I will not give the case. You'll go in for a percutaneous drainage. Okay. Now what happens? You go to the radio department. They say, no, PTINR is raised. We can't give you this. Then again, you'll have to stabilize the patient with your FFPs and your vitamin K. Then do everything. Then you raise your INR, you raise your prothrombin time, you correct it, and then you do your percutaneous biopsy, right? Now, prothrombin time might be a crude estimate. The estimate that we are given these days is something called INR. INR is called International Normalized Ratio. Now, what does it mean? There's a test PTINR is what you get, and the normal. Okay, the ratio of that, which is powered to something called ISI, that is International Standardized Unit. Now, this is a constant. Okay, this will be based on your tissue extracts or your standardization from various thromboplastins. Now you do this ratio, which the machine does, which your autoanalyzer does for you, and you get something for your INR. Now, if you have an INR, the INR will need to be titrated every time, because there is a target INR which needs to be achieved. Okay, when a patient is on these drugs like warfarin. Okay. Now, there are tests which assess the metabolic capacity of the liver, because see, liver generates a few things. Okay, say it is responsible for bilirubin metabolism. Okay, so you can use that. Now there are other tests which test your detoxification concentration of the liver. That is again metabolism, isn't it? So you have these few dyes, indocyanin green, okay, lidocaine clearance, all of these things. So you can use these blood tests, or you can have breath tests, okay, which means you can somehow assess the excretion quality of the liver through breath tests. Okay, now the synthetic capacity of the liver, say bilirubin, you all just discuss this every time in your obstructive jaundice class. What happens is that RBCs have hemoglobin in them. Okay, so they can be divided into heme and globin. Now these roam around in the blood. Around 120 days later, they go to a reticuloendothelial cells of the liver or the spleen. They get phagocytosed, and the heme releases something called bilirubin. Bilirubin gets synthesized. Okay, remember those charts from Satyanarayan? You might have forgotten all of this. Even I have. So bilirubin gets synthesized after they are being eaten by the reticuloendothelial cells of the spleen. Now what happens is that this bilirubin binds to albumin, like Vikram and Betal. What happens? Bilirubin just joins to the back of albumin, and it gets taken to the liver. Now in the liver, what happens? They get conjugated by an enzyme called UDT glucuronyl transferase. Right. Now that becomes something called conjugated bilirubin. This conjugated bilirubin, what happens is that it is excreted in the bile ducts. Okay, and they come to the intestine. Now in the terminal ileum, what happens? These bile salts and acids get absorbed into the liver as enterohepatic circulation, and this thing goes on and on. Right. So at any time, if you measure the serum bilirubin, you can have a conjugated bilirubin or a direct bilirubin, which is water soluble and gets excreted in the kidneys. And you can have something that is unconjugated bilirubin, that is your indirect bilirubin, which is not water soluble. Okay. Now, if you remember your biochemistry classes, you did something called a Vandenberg's test, where you add in sulfuric acid to sample containing bilirubin. Now, if you get a purple colored test, or you get a test tube with purple color, which means your conjugated bilirubin, your direct bilirubin increases, or it's present due to something called azobilirubin, right? So you get this test with a purple test tube, which means your direct bilirubin is raised. So that is why this, it's measured directly. It is excreted in the kidney. So that is what is conjugated bilirubin, right? So where do you find conjugated bilirubin to rise? You can find it in a few hepatic causes like viral hepatitis, again, drug-induced liver disorders, alcoholic hepatitis, autoimmune hepatitis, and sepsis. It's something very common. Anything goes wrong with the liver, always check the viral status of the patient, check whether the patient has drugs, check whether the patient is an alcoholic, and autoimmune hepatitis. All of these things, these are just common medical conditions which are always associated with hepatic failure and rise in any of these enzymes. Okay, you can have raised bilirubin due to benign strictures or stones, or maybe primary biliary cirrhosis. Again, this is an intrahepatic component also in the extrahepatic ducts. Malignancies like cholangiocarcinoma, carcinoma gallbladder, or CA pancreas. Now, you can have little kids with raised bilirubin, again conjugated bilirubin. You can have them with Dubin-Johnson or Rotor syndrome. Okay, you're often asked the cause of raised conjugated bilirubin. You want to take a screenshot of this, you can take a screenshot of this. Okay, and just to mug it up and vomit it in front of the examiner. See, sir, there are causes in the liver, there are causes in the bile duct, and there are causes in the neonatal period. Okay, and I have summarized them in this portion, right? Again, let's come back to the bilirubin synthesis. Now, see, in the bilirubin synthesis, what happens when the hepatocyte, when the RBC is being phagocytosed by the liver or spleen, you can have some sort of pathology here which causes more hemolysis. Okay, more hemolysis, which means there will be a rise in the bilirubin. Why does that happen? You can have due to hemolysis. Suppose there is ineffective erythropoiesis, also resorption of a large amount of hematoma. See, we did a splenectomy in one patient who had a pancreatic fracture, and there was a large amount of hematoma in the lesser sac. Now, next morning, I am coming to the surgical ICU and I'm kind of like worried. What happened? Why is the bilirubin raised? Why the patient? Why does the patient have jaundice? Why? Because the patient has a large.
Okay, so by the time Dr. Basu joins in, what I will do is that I will take you to a little more advanced arena of liver function test. I think what he has said is very beautiful till now. Is listening to each and every point. For many of us, it really felt as a deja vu, and I feel that it has been the same experience for you guys also. So what we will be doing is that, just give me a second. I will be taking you through. Exactly. Now let me have an open page, please. Right. So what I will be doing is, by the time Dr. Basu joins in, okay. Right. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Good. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir, it's clear, sir.
Okay. Right. Now, up till what he has said now, I will add a few points. And what I will do is that I will make an algorithm for a postgraduate examination. Because if you are given, as Dr. Basu was saying, that it can be given as a short note. Now, what is our modern thoughts about knowing about something called as an LFT? Now, whenever we talk about a liver function test, what he has said, believe me, ladies and gentlemen, that is the 90% of the class today. Okay, I will be now telling you about the rest 10%, particularly for your NEET SS examinations. Now, a lot has changed regarding our concepts about a liver function test. Now, when we were in medical school, we were taught that the tests that he had said, and majority of them used to come under something called as a static test. Whereas the new group of the tests that are done are nowadays called as a dynamic test. Now, these are things that are usually not quoted in your conventional textbooks, but these are what we practice every day. Now, when you talk about a static test, we divide. Now, this is what Dr. Basu did. So he divided these topics into something called tests for excretion. Now, can you name me any of the tests that predicts what has been taught till now that predicts an excretion ability of the liver?
Bilirubin.
Very good. Is bilirubin. Good. Point number 2. Let us talk about tests for cholestasis, particularly in an obstructive jaundice. Can you name me some tests that he has taught that indicate there is an obstructive nature of the jaundice?
ALP and GGT.
Very good. Excellent. So let us talk now. Can you name me any predictor for a liver injury?
The aminotransferase.
Yes.
Okay. And last one, can you tell me any factor for the synthetic ability of the liver? That means
The
the
albumin.
good, very good. Not only albumin, sir. It is
Prothrombin.
very good. And
PTINR.
prothrombin time or an INR. And definitely, as the logic says that if you add the word coagulation factors, so adding the term coagulation factors would have been a better word. So remember that these are technically called as static tests. That means you draw a sample of blood and send it to the lab, and the lab technician reports this to you. And this is what, as a clinician, we believe, and we do it more or less every day. But the dynamic tests are those that you require when you are planning a liver resection, and we will be coming to this very quickly. Particularly in a liver transplant, this becomes an important issue. Particularly, remember, the main issue about knowing about this group of tests that you may not have heard about this are something to do with liver resection, and in this modern era, very importantly, with a liver transplant. So we divide the dynamic tests into 3 groups. One, Dynamic test of clearance. Now remember that excretion was measured by bilirubin, but we want to see exactly what amount of liver is retaining what and what amount of liver is clearing the thing that you are challenging him to excrete. So the best one is done by something called as an ICG, indocyanine green, and we measure something called as an R15. Now what is that R15? I will come to later on. We used to do something called as a caffeine, but again, I think caffeine is better enjoyed in a cup of tea or a coffee rather than on the liver being told to excrete. Or if you talk to gastro guys, they use something called as bromosulfatine. I'm not good with spellings, so this is called as bromosulfatine test. But out of these, what stands out is definitely an indocyanine green. Now, when you talk about something called elimination. Now, elimination means it is somewhat like again that bilirubin story. Again, we talk about the galactose tests, which are more of an experimental, and we as clinicians do not usually, or surgeons, we do not usually require that. Or if you are recording to test for something called the xenobiotics, that means what amount of liver is working and what amount of liver is metabolizing. Particularly, remember, we are required to know about metabolomics. I have learned about these new terms and they are very interesting. Okay, Shilaji, just let me know when Dr. Basu joins in. Okay, right. Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
So please let me know when he joins in. Right. So now these are the tests. If you have written this in your notebooks, so remember that these are the something called as dynamic tests of function. Now we usually, as I've said, until and unless you are going in for and direct assessment or you are planning for a liver resection, this is the reason that I told you as a surgeon, this is what I am more interested rather than the static ones, because static ones are the baseline. What Dr. Basu has taught, as I said, is 90% of the class, and this is your basic fundamental. Now, whenever we talk about a few words, like let us talk about something called as the indocyanine green story. Now, what is this indocyanine green? Do any of you have an experience about use of this during a lab colleague? Because this has been the new buzzword for the last 4 or 5 years. Indocyanine green, you see during conferences and all of these interesting things. Has any one of you have any particular experience about use of this thing called as an indocyanine green? No one? Okay. Now, what is this thing called indocyanine green? Now, remember a few basic things about an ICG, commonly called as ICG. Many of us have forgotten the full form even. Okay. Now, the first one is that this is an inert media. This is water soluble. So these are the two important criterions that we require to remember. And what is very interesting is that this contains a molecule which is fluorescent. Now, if you do not know what is fluorescent, catch a few night flies and hold it in a box and switch off the light in the room and you'll see, wow, the fluorescence that you see is called as the fluorescence. And something called the material that is responsible is a big complicated tongue twister chemical name called as tricarbocyanine. So wow, man. So I came to know for it from a company product which was being promoted. Now this is, forget that. If you have forgotten that, no issues. But what I'm more interested is that the protein capability of binding or the protein binding ability of this looks exactly like that of bilirubin at being around 95%. So, and these proteins that they bind are not only albumin, they are also responsible for binding to lipoproteins as well as albumin. Now, forget about this one, okay? But the main point that I am interested as a surgeon is to know that about 70 to 80% of this is metabolized by the liver and is kicked out from the liver through the bile duct and the gallbladder, and hence during a lab pulley you use an ICG to visualize the bile duct. So this is the basic logic about this part, and I hope that you have known this. So if you see the picture in a screen, so if you have gone to conferences with ICG capable monitors. You get to see that beautiful fluorescence then that shows you the gallbladder. The surgeon tells you, see, I prevented a bile duct injury, and all these stories then come up. Now, but today's discussion, ladies and gentlemen, is not about the surgeon seeing the gallbladder or the bile duct. Today's discussion is a little more complicated than that. Now, what is important is what we are required to know are something called as a little bit of pharmacology, called as the kinetics of excretion of something called ICG. Now, when you talk about the kinetics of excretion of an ICG, then again, I am going to make a graph, and don't please laugh at the graph, because the graph resembles a first peak, the graph resembles a second peak, and then thereafter an excretion. Now, this is the first peak. Okay, this is the second peak, and this is the excretion phase. Now, the second peak happens because if this is something that you have given either intravenously, or this is something that has been given intravenously, as you can understand, there will be a peak. There is a reabsorption from the GI tract, so transiently, so there is a small second peak, and then followed by the excretion. Now, the main point of this is that the main issues about this is in hemodynamic stable patient. So I hope that all our patients are hemodynamic stable patients. We are required to measure, that means a normal patient, okay, not a hemodynamic unstable patient, a hemodynamic stable patient. Nowadays we measure two entities. One is technically called as an R15, okay, and what is this R15 business? Now, after an ICG is injected, remember that after an ICG is injected, as I have said, it will come in the blood, and it is distributed throughout the body by around 3 minutes, more or less. Now, after this is distributed in this one, remember that it has a very short half-life of about 5 minutes. So that means if you make it 3 times that of 5, by around 15 minutes, you expect that how much amount of the drug is excreted. Again, little bit of pharmacology, so don't get angry at me. Okay, so hello, Shilajit, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, right. So if there is now
70%.
okay, good one. So that means if I allow around say 4 half-lives for a drug that has a half-life of 5 minutes, by around 20 minutes, how much amount of drug is eliminated? Rough logic is about 80% of the drug is more or less kicked out of the body. That means what is important is that what is something called as an R15. Now, what is R15 values will be thus related to the amount of the retention that is done in a case of an ICG. Now, please understand that again, I will be repeating this fact again. So, what is important is what is this R15 is that. Now, R15 is thus very straightforward, or an ICG R15 predicts about how much amount is the retention by the liver at the end of about a 15 minutes. Now, why should I be knowing about this one, or why should this be important for your points? Now, the main point to remember is that because I'm going to tell you about the main technical reason why I am telling you about all of these. See, the main reason or the technicalities that we go by is we want to determine, as I've said, this is a dynamic test. Now, if this is a dynamic test, then remember that I want to know how much amount of this is being retained by the liver. Now, tell me one thing, how is ICG taken out by the human body? Hello? How is ICG taken out by the human body? How is ICG kicked out from the human body?
Sir, hepatic from
By
the
liver, liver.
liver. Yes.
Okay. Bottom line thing is liver. The liver takes it up. Liver cannot digest it. It is an inert molecule and it just kicks it out. Have I made you understand up till this point? That means if the liver is a healthy liver, will it retain ICG or will it kick out ICG? What is your opinion?
So kick out ICG.
Kick out.
Very good. It will kick out ICG. That means if the liver is healthy, the ICG R15 values will be less than 10%. I hope you will agree with me.
Yes, sir.
And if it is less than 10%, for a surgeon like you and me, it means that I can very safely remove more than 2 segments of the liver. Understand the dynamics of the story. Have you understood up till this point?
Yes,
Hello?
sir.
Good. Now, if the ICG values or R15 values are between 10 to 20%, what does it suggest? That the liver is okay. That means it is retaining some amount of that ICG. That means the liver is a little bit of diseased. Okay. So the liver is a little bit of diseased liver. Now, if this is a diseased liver, that means you can take about 1 segment safely. It is not that you cannot take another segment, but it will be safe to restrict yourself 1 segment. Okay. But if the values are between 20% or more, what does it definitely suggest? That the liver is grossly diseased. And if you take out more amount of liver, can you tell me indirectly what are you trying to see? It is not that I am, say, a surgeon who fears this liver resection. No. What is the problem that I am trying to contemplate by this liver resection? Is the amount of the liver that is retained, will this be able to take the brunt of the liver resection? Or is the volume of the liver adequate in the post-operative period? Have I made you understand up till this? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that means more than 20%, if you take out 1 segment, this is maximum that I can allow you. So now tell me, with this knowledge that I have given, what surgery am I contemplating, or what is the nature of the liver surgery that I am teaching you or I'm trying to teach you?
Means domino liver transplant.
Not domino, sir. Segments, sir. Segments. What type of surgery, sir? I'm only interested with.
Is segmental hepatectomy or
Sections,
maybe
Exactly.
metastasectomy or hepatocellular
Exactly. Oh, well,
neuroendocrine?
Soptik, welcome back. Welcome back. By
Yes,
the
sir.
time.
I have
Okay,
been
so-
listening to this ICG.
Okay.
Something happened
so-
with the internet.
Okay, no issues, because today we had a flash lightning and a big thunder cloud in
Yes,
Kolkata.
yes.
So many places we don't have internet. Okay, so now, I will just end in around 5 minutes, Soptik, and then we'll again continue. Okay, so by the time then, so that means understand that this is technically something called as what kind of test, static or dynamic?
dynamic.
Dynamic. Now remember that what Shoptik has taught you, as I have said, is 90% of your assessment. This is for those candidates during an exam or writing a theory note where the examiner says that, okay, let me ask you something more to give you 90% marks. So this is called as a dynamic test. As I've said, ICG is the majority of the people across the world now do something called as an ICG R15. So I have taught you this terminology into that. Now, before I wind up, I will now be giving you a small algorithm, which definitely, if you think over, these liver resection stories about HCCs are a real hot debate in GI and in oncology. And the more you read, particularly your Sabiston and Blumgart, then you will get a little taste about what is this thing going to come up. The basic idea, ladies and gentlemen, is only to ask you as a surgeon is that this is a tumor. Say, for example, this is a gallbladder cancer, and this gallbladder cancer is into the segment 4B, 5, and maybe even the segment 6. Now, my intent is to take this part of the liver out. You say, okay, sir, so simple an operation. You see, Shoptik, how simple it is to do a liver resection in an iPad. It is so easy.
Exactly.
Okay, so maybe one day life will be exactly like that, and
Exactly.
you keep the rest of the liver. Now tell me, let me take a quick survey from all of you. How do you know that this liver remnant is adequate?
So from this R15 value.
Oh, so this is a new thing that I have taught you. Okay, the question was out. Okay, but how do you know that this area of the liver will be okay? Say you did not know about the R15. What was the test
Liver
that
volumetry and functional
exactly?
residual liver assessment.
So if you think about something called liver volumetry. Now, what is liver volumetry? Now, see, liver volumetry is a CT scan or an MRI, because nowadays there are MRI provost protocols, which if you read the Blumgart, then they are going to tell about that. If you compare the CT versus MR volumetries, definitely the radiologists have a good job in predicting whether this amount of the right lobe or the left lobe of the liver is okay. But that is the radiologist's impression. Remember, the radiologist can tell you, and the radiologist writes a very diplomatic line at the end of all your reports. What is that report? What is that beautiful line? Clinical correlation required. So that means, now tell me, with that clinical correlation required statement, will you feel, because after the liver failure happens, the chap smiles at you and says that I told you to do a clinical correlation. So do you know of any other test? Because Shoptik was going to end at that point, and I was thinking about starting at that point. Is, see, the simplest of the tests that we do is something called as a Child-Pugh score. Okay, so this was the simple score that even I follow every day. A child A, child B, child C. Which one do you think tolerates a liver resection good? Because Shoptik, okay, child A tolerates a liver resection very good, 3 sticks. Child B is divided into early and late, maybe 1 tick, late, question mark, C, big question mark. This patient is fit for a transplant if you can get a donor. But what is important is, if you are planning for a surgery on the liver or an obstructive jaundice, Whipple's, hepaticojejunostomies, radicales, hepatomas, please remember this is our simple poor man's assessment about what is my post-operative outcome going to be. Now, if we have talked about a Child-Pugh score, remember that, then people said that, okay, doc, I have learned about something called as a Child-Pugh score. Do you know of any other better ways? Can you say, tell me any other better ways to predict the liver failure rates? Now, then, in your, very nice. In your MCQ world, you heard about a new term, isn't it? MELD. What is the full form of this thing?
Model for
End stage liver disease.
Very good. Okay, please. Okay, do you know that this even came as an MCQ once in a NEET PG? Do you know something? This came as an
I
MCQ
cannot
once.
remember. See, that is what I was telling them. I was continuing here. I don't know where it got disconnected. So I was telling them that I can't remember this formula ever.
No. See, again, MELD formula is not for you to remember, except for some funny. Come on, man. MELD is to be done by a computer. Now, if you are trying to remember the formula, okay. So I do not ever try to remember the formula for MELD. This is not a human thing. So why will I try to be an extra human? Okay, so I do not remember. But one thing,
they'll often give you short notes in it. We got a short note once and MELD.
So because MELD is an extremely important short note, and while we have a class on transplant, it is extremely important for you to understand MELD. But for an MCQ purpose, as I'm a quiz master, do you know what is the interesting part? Why was MELD discovered? What was the initial job for which MELD was discovered for? Can anyone of you tell me? What was exactly the reason MELD was discovered for? Like when that child score was discussed, the spook gentleman came in little late, and the first component was something called Child and Turcot. They were both the surgeons who did a portable shunt surgery, and they invented the Child Turcot score to predict the death rate after a shunt operation. And then this gentleman called Pug went out. Turcot went out and Pug came in. Okay. Now, but tell me, can you know? Do you know what is the reason MELD was discovered for? This is an MCQ for your NEET SS. Was for predicting
For
mortality.
shunt surgery only,
Sir,
whether they can wait for transplant or not.
no, sir, absolutely not. That is your reason of using this now. MELD was invented for seeing the mortality after tips. But now we understood that, okay, this has a better use, and we now use it for triaging our patients of transplant. But my job is not to teach you today. My job is to teach you a very simple rule. Remember that if the MELD score is greater than or equal to 9, the patient will really have a high risk of a liver failure in the post-operative period. So that is an important and an interesting part of the story. So remember, what are the things that I told you? Child, and number 2 is MELD. And then comes something called as that ICGR15. Can you remember this ICGR15? Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Right? Okay. So now I will end just within 2 minutes. Okay. And then, as I have said, depends upon which part of the world you are. ICG thing is mainly done by the Koreans, the Japanese, and the Vietnam and the Thailand guys. That means those far eastern people. Whereas if you go to the European centers, like say the Italian center, the Spain centers, and a few Americans, they will prefer more of CT volumetry and MR volumetry. If you go to the more of eastern side, that means if you talk about the those Japanese and the Koreans, they prefer more of this ICG. Now, what I am going to give you is something called as the criteria, that is a very famous algorithm called as the
Makuchi
criteria. Exactly. So that is called as the Makuchi criteria for a safe liver resection. Now, why should we be mentioning both? Is that this is the essence of a surgeon knowing an LFT. So for all of you, remember that the basic essence is not to recapitulate what you learned in biochemistry. Yes, that is important, as I've said, for the 90% marks. And at the end of the after Shoptika said, I will be again coming back with those dinosaur-like questions for you. Don't worry. Okay. But the Makuchi criteria is very straight. It asks you whether the patient which you are planning for a liver resection, does the patient have ascites? Yes or no. If the patient has ascites, okay, if the patient has ascites, yes, and it is not controlled by your medications. I hope you know what are the medications. Just remember, this patient is unfit for a liver resection. Very simple. This patient is unfit for a liver resection, and we do not go for a liver resection. However, if the ascites is nil, or if the ascites is controlled by a medication, then remember the test that we do is bilirubin. Very, very baseline test. Is bilirubin a static or a dynamic test?
Static.
Static, sir.
Static test. And if the bilirubin levels are normal, but if the bilirubin levels are between 1.1 to 1.5 milligram per deciliter, we go in for a limited resection. If the bilirubin levels are 1.6 to 1.9, we go in for enucleation. Definitely, we are talking about HCCs and even maybe metastatic tumors. Bilirubin equal to or greater than 2, no liver dissection. Mind you, very important words. That means even for a cholangio cancer, it is better to think about a preoperative drainage before you plan for a resection of a cholangio cancer. So this is the Makuchi criteria. The story has not ended. If it is normal, then go for the ICG R15. Then go for the ICG R15. And if the ICG R15 levels are normal, then and then only you can go in for a trisegmentectomy. I hope you know what is a trisegmentectomy, what is a bisegmentectomy. Okay. However, now what we do is that with the ICGs in place, remember that, however, with the ICG stories in place, then what we have understood is then that after this ICG has been injected, and I showed you about this stories about this one, I will introduce you to something called as a K value. The K value is something that that kinetic chap measures, is called as the rate constant value. Okay, so that means it is again and that equation part about how much amount is eliminated. So it is all done dependent upon, so this thing is all done dependent upon what is the kinetic, that graph like picture that I showed, that the two peaks and the excretion. And if that K values are said to be 0.15, then it corresponds to an R15 values between 10 to 20%. That the Makuchi criteria can say that you are still safe to do the left lobectomy or a right monosegmentectomy. That means in the right liver, maybe one segment. Now, if the K values are 0.1, that means the R values are 20 to 29%. Technically enough, maximum is a word that is new, is something called subsegmentectomy. Now, this has been a new addition to the Brisbane terminology called a subsegmentectomy. And if the values are much less, that means 30% is being retained, this patient is technically not fit for a liver dissection. It is only an enucleation or a very limited find of a resection. So I will end at this point, and this is technically called as the Makuchi criteria to help you in understanding into something in that. Okay, so this is technically called as the Makuchi criteria. Another thing that has come up in the recent times is something called as the Ellis grade. Now, what is this Ellis grade? Now, Ellis grade is a accumulation about the albumin levels and the indocyanin levels, and so they have clubbed in around both. Again, needless to say, they are mostly done by the Japanese and the Koreans, and they have graded and tried to modify this. Again, this is exclusively for hepatocellular cancer when you are planning therapies. Okay, so I will end at this point. Shoptik, please continue. Please take the screen sharing. Okay,
Okay.
any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? I don't think any. Okay, Shoptik, the screen sharing is yours. Hello. Yeah.
Hello. Yes, sir.
So please.
Can you see? I mean,
Yes, yes.
where did I go off?
You went off probably after that ALP. No, that ALP study was good. Yes, you told us the story.
Here, sir.
Exactly.
Bilirubin metabolism.
That bilirubin metabolism, and you were telling that
At the
after the
end
distal
part.
that after the distal pancreatectomy, the patient had jaundice.
Yes. Okay. So what I was saying is that after the distal pancreatectomy, patient was having jaundice, which means the patient had a large hematoma which was getting reabsorbed. So because of that, the patient was having jaundice. You should see this is this point number 1 where you can have this. See this part of the cycle. You have hemolysis over here. You will get increased unconjugated bilirubin. Again, if the bilirubin is not transported to the liver properly due to some drugs, say rifampin or probenecid. Okay. Number 3, if you have a defective conjugation like your Kriegner-Lajar and your this thing, Crigler-Najjar Gilbert syndrome, right? So this was the thing. So anything, so what I tried to say was that anything before this conjugation, the blue segment is your conjugated, this is unconjugated. And this is anything that is after this this thing. If there's anything after this conjugation, the green segment is conjugated bilirubin. Okay, so you can just take a screenshot of this, okay, if you want, and often if you're asked by your examiners, right? Okay, so there's one test that is asked often as a question, is that how will you differentiate between Dubin-Johnson and Rotor syndrome? You can do your bromosulfitine excretion test. Okay. Now, another question that is often asked is that what is delta bilirubin? Delta bilirubin is when, see, you have a patient with cholestasis, which means the bilirubin is raised. Now, this bilirubin will go bind to albumin. Okay. This bilirubin binding to albumin is called delta bilirubin. Okay. And gradually what you'll see is that this elevated bilirubin will start to decrease. Right. Now, dye tests, I think Sir has discussed this very well. Right. I just summarized it in a very brief way. So the two dyes that were used were indocyanine green, R15, and the other is bromosulfitine. So bromosulfitine gets conjugated and ICG doesn't get conjugated, and you find the concentration again in the blood. Now, clinical implications, Sir has already discussed this. Now, from an MCQ point of view, if it is less than 14, you can go ahead with the hepatectomy. If the retention rate is more than 20, the functional residual liver capacity is less, and the patient's hepatic status is not going to sustain a hepatectomy. So these are called quantitative LFTs or QLFTs. Okay. Lidocaine clearance or also midazolam, because these are metabolized by cytochrome enzymes. You have your breath test, that is aminopyrine breath test. So you give a radioactive labeled carbon to the patient. Now this is metabolized by the liver, and it is excreted as radioactive carbon dioxide, which is measured from the exhaled air. Okay, which is measured from the exhaled air. Now you have something called a technetium-99 galactosyl human albumin scintigraphy. This M stands for metastable isomer. Okay, technetium-99 metastable isomer, which is again tagged to serum albumin. If the peak value is 90, then it's fine. So you do this with a nuclear medicine counterpart. So this is scintigraphy. Okay. Now I already told you this. Okay, so I went off here with the clinical implications of LFT. So if you have a patient with cholecystitis or maybe Mirizzi syndrome, or say CBD stone, you will have elevated bilirubin. Also your ALP and your transaminases will increase. So you need to do a MRCP and find out whether there is a CBD stone, right? Suppose in a gallstone pancreatitis, you get a patient with increased ALP. There is a propensity of having a CBD stone. So this patient might go into biliary sepsis and develop renal spentat. So will require an ERCP drainage. We've already spoken about child hook score and your MELD score. Sir has already discussed this. And if you want to remember this formula, I wrote it down for you people. Now, less than 14, you can go ahead with the hepatectomy. That is your child A status. Okay. Now, I'll just tell you this. Child-Turgot hook score is often given as a MCQ question for your NEET exam. So the components will be encephalopathy, ascites, bilirubin, albumin, and prothrombin time. Now, if you have mild to moderate encephalopathy, or it will be graded as 2, and if you have severe encephalopathy, it will be graded as 3 or 4. Okay. Now, ascites, if the patient is responsive to diuretics, it is grade 2. If it is not responsive to diuretics, it is grade 3. Now, bilirubin, albumin, and prothrombin time, you just need to remember the values. Okay. So bilirubin will range between 2 and 3, albumin between 2.8 and 3.5, and prothrombin time between 4 and 6, right? Now, the thing is, you will generally not be asked this INR value. I've never seen it being asked, But yes, up till here, they'll give you a clinical situation and you need to calculate the child's book score, often in an MCQ question. Now, especially if you're giving a GI exam, and class A again is a least severe form where you can go ahead with the surgery. Now, the clinical implications of a child book score comes in patients, especially with the hepatocellular carcinoma. There are few things like your child book score, then your performance status, that is your Karnofsky or ECOG. Okay. Now, when you combine this, you will get what is your Barcelona criteria. Okay. Barcelona criteria, you can resect a small hepatocellular carcinoma. If there is portal vein obstruction or if you have multifocal disease, then you need to go ahead with a transplant, orthotropic liver transplant. Now, if that doesn't work, if the patient has, child B or child C, you will need to go ahead with your transarterial chemoembolization and these things like sorafenib and supportive care. Right. Even these are important when you come to resect your colorectal liver metastasis or your neuroendocrine liver metastasis. So assessing the liver function with CTP score is also very important in cases with cirrhosis where you want to do a liver transplant, especially patients with portal hypertension with variceal bleeding. You need to calculate these, especially this and your MELD score. Okay. So that was like, I made a summary of this and I think sir dealt with this portion pretty well. So if you guys have any other questions, you can tell us.
Okay, right. Swaptik, just one point. Can you go to the child score, that picture?
Yes.
See, for everyone who is seeing this class, remember that the most important thing for a surgeon to remember is this table. I tell my residents sometimes to have it tattooed on the back of their hands. This is so important that all patients who are being planned for hepatobiliary surgery, it can be even a cholecystectomy if you require to understand. This was used initially for cirrhosis, but this has now become the benchmark for all liver surgeries even to predict the mortality outcome for non-biliary complications, like again for hepatic encephalopathies and other deaths. Okay, number one. Number two is that that the grading, that this is someone asked me about this. What is this grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4 in a encephalopathy? Now, when you are being so objective, as I've told you, what is the name of this grading that I told you? Very good. It is called as a West Haven criteria. WEST, Haven is HAVEN. It is not HEA. Okay, so it is West HAVEN criteria. Grade 1 is a covert criteria. That means the patient has altered sleep pattern. Grade 2 is asterixis. Grade 3 is somnolence or semi-stupor. Grade 4 is coma. The rest of the things, what he has mentioned, please remember, if you have to remember only one thing from today's class, I will request you to remember this part extremely well, something called as a child book score. Okay. Now, the other parts of these questions are some questions which I feel are being asked by some examiners who I really do not know whether I should be asking them, but still. Now, can you tell me, this is what Dr. Shoptik taught you. I am taking a small recap test. Why is this unconjugated bilirubin called indirect, and why is the direct bilirubin called a conjugated? Okay, do you have any answer to this?
So direct bilirubin will be detecting directly in the Van der Waals list.
Very good. Thank you very much, sir. This is what your examiners, some old examiners will like to hear this word. It is directly because it can directly react with that agent called as, in that reaction called as Van de Berg agent. Okay. And so why is it called as indirect then?
We subtract the direct bilirubin from total bilirubin, then we get
No, sir, not exactly. No, sir, that is not the reason you call it as indirect. It is not about your mathematics which is being calculated, direct calculation and indirect calculation. Okay. Shoptik, what is the reason? What is the reason that Dr. Shoptik told you? Is because what is the material that you added to that? Sir, we added little amount of acid, isn't it? Okay. So we added a amount of acid to that. So what was important was this unconjugated bilirubin that does not directly, no, not acid probably. We added, Shopti, we added alcohol. No, I really go
No,
and
no,
forget
acid
it.
only, acid. They form azobilirubin. Yes.
Azobilirubin, right.
Hmm.
Now see, the thing that I remembered from my those medical school days was that that chemical that was present in that Van de Berg reaction contained something called as sulfonylic acid and sodium
Exactly,
nitrite.
exactly,
Okay,
exactly.
so that was the name of that chemical, maybe sulfonylic acid. That was not sulfuric acid. So one of my friends told it in an exam. Examiner laughed at him. So I still remember that first MBBS, those young days. Okay, now so the main point is that in an indirect test, whatever is that chemical, God knows what, that chemical is added to that indirect bilirubin and you don't get a color. Okay, that color is purple and is called as azobilirubin. And so what was added was some amount of methyl alcohol or some amount of acid, and that gave that color. So that means to bring the color, it doesn't come directly, it comes by an indirect maneuver. So then that is called as an indirect form or an unconjugated form. So that is a question that is asked by some oldies.
So
The
just can
next,
you please repeat? I got confused, sir.
okay, Shoptik, please repeat.
See, this test is that in Vandenberg reaction, you're trying to find out direct bilirubin. So that there, you take the sample, you add that reagent to it, the sulfonuric acid, and then to that you will add the alcohol. Okay. Now, initially, what happens if there is direct bilirubin or conjugated bilirubin, it will react and form what is called azobilirubin. You get a purple color. Since you see this directly, it is direct bilirubin. Okay. And if it doesn't react, then you do not have conjugated. It is a test for conjugated bilirubinemia. So if you have purple color, you have conjugated bilirubin. Don't have it, it is unconjugated bilirubin.
Okay. So did you understand the point? Where is it called as unconjugated bilirubin or an indirect bilirubin? Hello? Right?
Yes, sir. So when we are adding the alcohol.
You are adding the alcohol when the color doesn't come.
Okay, okay.
When you add
But
that chemical to that serum, if you do get a color, that is called as direct test. Okay. So that means there is presence of conjugated bilirubin. You do not get a color, then you add that alcohol, methyl alcohol, and you get that color. So that is called as an indirect test or an unconjugated bilirubin.
okay, sir.
Okay, good. Now another test of concern. Now if you are wondering that, okay, what is the reason that we as a surgeon should know this? I do not see any reason of knowing this. Okay, I do not know whether these labs nowadays do it or not. Maybe MBBS students, I still do not know. Is it still taught in MBBS? I do not know this.
Yes,
thing.
yes,
Yes,
we
sir.
did it. We did it.
Oh, you guys did it. Okay, man.
Yes, yes.
Even I have forgotten. Okay.
Now, even I have forgotten. I have done it and I have forgotten.
Right. No, see, I had an honors in biochemistry, but still, these are all again looks as in deja vu. Another interesting thing, how to test for bile salts in urine. Now that is important.
Rothera's test. Rothera's test.
No,
Just add
Rothera was asked, right. So now this is a interesting, not only an MCQ, but believe me, I have seen at least 4 examiners, all of them definitely with a white and gray hair, to ask about candidates in an obstructive jaundice. What is the bedside test in the urine that is going to tell you that it contains bile or it is an obstructive jaundice urine? Can you tell me that test? Hello.
Sir, it tests
Can you tell me the name of
urobilinogen.
that test? Remember that this is an interesting question from an oldies examiner.
Hey,
But ironically, where will you
Very
get the
good.
sulfur powder from? That is the thing.
Again, come on, man. Crackers are banned, I know that. Okay, so even during the Diwali times, we don't get crackers nowadays. But still, remember there is a test someone said is called as Hayes sulfur
Hayes
powder
test,
test.
yes.
Okay, someone who said that Hayes sulfur powder test. Can you tell me what is the thing that was done? Hello.
Sir, it turns dark. Means it tests
No.
the urobilinogen.
Yes,
No,
yes.
no, sir, no, not exactly. See, the logic again was very simple. The logic is that bile salts, okay, lower the surface tension of the water or medium. Okay. Now, what normally happens is, what I used to remember in my MBBS, those biochem days, was that sulfur as such is a light thing. So if you sprinkle some sulfur over water, sulfur
It
is
will
known
float.
to float. But if there is a bile salt, the
It will
sulfur
sink.
sinks. Bas. This is the single bottom line. That means, now tell me, which kind of jaundice has bile salt in the urine? Obstructive, hemolytic, or hepatic?
Sir, hepatic and obstructive.
Okay, so come on, man, you are a surgeon. Say obstructive first rather than a hepatic. Okay, so hepatic and then, or sorry, again, say obstructive and then. So in this Hayes sulfur test, what is going to happen to that urine thing? Sir, that sulfur, sorry, that sulfur thing, sulfur is going to
Sulfur
precipitate down. Sinks. That's it. The bottom line of that test is called as that. Nowadays, we have been intelligent enough. We do our blood test. But again, you still get those kind of examiners who are going to like to ask you about those questions. Okay. Now, there used to be some archaic test called as Fouchet's test, Gemlin's test. Again, I do not know who did that or which examiner did that. Even when your examiners may be young, they did that. It is good that they have still remembered those names, called as Gemlin's test and Fouchet's test. They were done for presence of, again, conjugated bilirubin in the urine, etc. So we are not interested by those tests called Fouchet's test, etc. And the Gremlin's test and all of those things. So more or less, the last point to remember is the patient has a hemolytic jaundice. What is the color of the urine? Now that is an interesting question. What is the color of urine in hemolytic jaundice? Hello? Normal. Okay. Why is it normal? What is that thing that makes the urine color normal? Bilirubin levels are more in the blood. Hello? Because what is the material that is excreted in the urine? Is urobilinogen. Now, urobilinogen is present. So now tell me,
that is
again, colorless. Now tell me a chemical test to detect that urobilinogen. That means when you add something, it is like those movies where you see scientists mixing thing and wow, it turns pink.
The sulfur test.
Come on, man, not the sulfur test. Sulfur test was for bile salt. Urobilinogen. Do you know of that test in urobilinogen? Okay, that test was again taught in, I do not know whether they still teach that in biochemistry, called as Ehrlich's reagent. Ehrlich's reagent contains hydrochloric acid and some amount of a material called as dimethyl aminobenzaldehyde. So again, so it's an aldehyde thing. So all those chemistry things that you may be asked about in or pathology. So what is the name of that agent? Ehrlich's test. Okay, Shopti, can you kindly write that, or where you have written that, okay, can you please show them that highlighted thing, that urobilinogen in urine, because bus. So that's it. So urobilinogen in urine and the material.
This one over here.
Oh, so this one exactly. So urobilinogen exactly near that kidney picture. So the name of that test is Ehrlich's test.
And
It
in
is called as
feces, it is stercobilinogen.
And feces, it is stercobilinogen. Okay. And the last googly question of the day: what is icteric index? Okay, so these are all those dinosaur questions which I have seen. Really, Shoptik, I have seen examiners ask this one, and then I looked up on the net, and then I really banged my head on a wall and asked them, oh my God. Okay, so they should not be using a smartphone.
What did you ask?
So
What
these
is
are questions
icteric
like
index?
those 3.74 newtons per kg, that one we were discussing.
Exactly. So what is icteric index? Does anyone of you know what is an icteric index?
So like more than, if it is 5, then palms and sole will be yellow.
Not exactly, sir. See, these are again those, again, I told you, dinosaur examiner questions. Well, icteric index was in which basically do you remember in your school or your class 11, class 12 or those chemistry classes, what is the color of potassium dichromate? We used to make a volcano out of that, I remembered. What was the color of
Yes, sir.
potassium dichromate?
Reddish, sir.
Okay, it was more or less an orange-like thing, isn't it? So it looked like that of the urine of a obstructive jaundice. Remember that? So nowadays I remember. Now the main thing is that in one test tube you take the potassium dichromate, and another test tube you take the serum of the patient, and you compare both of them and do some calculations and whatnot. The basic problem is, the basic thing that you may be laughing at this answer is that people said that they measure how intense it was to a potassium dichromate, and dependent upon that they calculated the bilirubin concentrates. So maybe it was done 150 years back. Okay, I know that, but still you can those examiners still now. So that is called as an icteric index. So search the Google for that, you will find that. Okay, so we discussed probably from the most advanced to the least advanced. Okay, so we went through a time machine today. And Shuptik did an excellent job with, I think all of you have taken those notes on the LFT, because he did an excellent job in describing the fundamentals. As I've said, 90% of this most important part of this chapter. Okay, right. Thank you, everyone. So any other questions, please?
So can you re-show the GGT test wala slide?
GGT.
This one.
Yes.
I'll do something. I'll send this PDF to the group.
Okay, let us see that they have the video recording. So I think Dr.
they'll have
Rudrajit
the
will be
videos.
they will be showing the video recording.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, you've seen it, no?
Right.
Anything else?
Okay. I think then if you don't have
We
any
had an
questions,
exhaustive discussion today, and
exhaustive discussion.
yes, even
Okay.
I learned a few things new and
Thank you, sir.
recapitulated a lot of first
No,
MD
it
stuff.
was a deja vu for me, Shoptik. Thank you very much.
Exactly.
Okay, so
I'll have to
LFT
find out my practical khata biochemistry. It's all written there. I should find it out from all the
all
junk.
these tests. Okay, right. Okay then. So good night, everyone. Oh, Rudrajit has entered. Okay, so we are ending now. Rudrajit, any more comments? Hello.
No,
Hello?
Ramanuj, I just entered.
Oh, we had an exhaustive discussion on
Yeah,
all
that's what I
things.
said. This is going on quite some time.
Okay, so exhaustive discussion means we went through a time machine. Okay, tests that were done 150 years back to the latest of the tests that is done in Korea.
Oh, excellent.
Okay, so we talked about publications that emanated from the last year to publications that maybe 200 years back.
Okay.
Okay. So right.
Okay. Wow.
Okay.
Right.
So with this, thank you everyone. A good night. Okay. Bye.
Good night.